I'll concede your point just for brevity, but
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is it? Capital One Bowl. It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One
dude,
Bowl.
where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like, what, 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to episode 348 of the Buck Around. I am one half of said Buck Around, joined, as always, by my aligned colleague, or maybe misaligned colleague, seeing as your schedule changed, Maxwell Brusky.
That's true.
Max, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about football when like the last week in Badger Nation has had, you know, like an actual national championship at like the top of like an Alabama Bear Bryant, Nick Saban level dynasty that, you know, I mean, it gets attention, but not like that. But it's like all time great. Then of course there's basketball, and then there's women's basketball. And I don't pay attention to it too much, but it is stories of Badger Nation. So for us to be talking about football, especially when they've been on spring break and haven't practiced in a week, I don't know if that's refreshing or I don't know. I'm happy to do it. Let's
It's
just say
challenging. I mean, we're going to let everybody get over the heartache of America's sweetheart Dan Hurley losing and Long Island Skeletor Rick Pitino making an early exit. So
Do people call him Long Island Skeletor?
That's what I call him.
I love it.
Well, I mean, he's amazing. I mean, he was the original, like, ooh, my skin crawls.
Oh yeah, I know. he cracks me up. He's always cracked me up. I can remember being a kid, like even in the freaking Providence days, that dude has always cracked me up.
Yeah, he's unique. So
Yes, unique.
Yeah, we're gonna fill that void for people. And like you said, it's a bit of a challenge just because we had what did we get? 3 open practices. Then actually I think it was they had one that was going to be TBD. I actually had the media schedule up before.
Yeah,
that
that's
ended
what I
up
thought.
being open, and then a closed one, which had me totally convinced that there was something super secret going on, and my ears perked up, and then was pointed out to me. Oh no, it's just because they have hockey and basketball going on, so all the SIDs are out of town, and you're like, oh well, that's not nearly as cool as I'd hoped.
That's actually what I'm getting at. You and I were talking about that pre-show, but it has been a pretty busy week in Badger Nation.
It has, but
as busy as it ever gets.
well, and the hard part though is I do feel like with football, right? You know, we did our sort of things we're watching. I don't know that I feel like I'm getting any kind of indication of I'm moving towards getting answers to those things, and it may just be because it's so early, and I'm not quite like I'm expecting too much out of 3 practices, but we'll see. You know,
Sure,
it's a new
sure.
install, blah 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 blah. But anyways, here we are. So you are going to be our thought leader on spring practice.
Yay.
And we need thought leaders. It's like we're developing a cult here. You're the charismatic. So
Yep.
let's
I like it. The analogy works.
let's do this. I give you the floor.
So there's not much to take, and I'm going on kind of very limited observations. It's not like I've been there. As folks know, we neither of us possess media credentials with the program. So even if the practices are open, we're taking the information like everybody else. But I think the 2 things that really stand out so far are how much different personnel there are, or how many different stuff there is in the front 7. Mitchell thing is interesting with the outside linebackers, and it seems like he has more people under his like umbrella. I don't know what you want to take from that. And I think, and we're definitely going to get to this in the second half of the show. But when you look at the turnover just in a year between last year's front 7 and this year's front 7, it's pretty amazing. And what the hell you can take from it, I don't know, but it is different. So, and then the other one would be another kind of vibe thing on offense. So which one would you like to tackle first? I'm leading the thoughts, but I will defer that question to you.
Yeah, why are you doing that? I'm just wanted to sit here and listen and do
Well,
nothing.
I'll tell you what.
Uh,
Let's do this. Let's talk offense because then we can talk defense, and then we'll segue into
yes.
part 2 of the show.
Because
How's
my
that?
big thing is I do have most of my thoughts are offensively related.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. No, that's perfect. So it sounds kind of funny, but like the limited videos and stuff that you see, I feel like what it's going to look like when the season opens, and I hope it looks like this versus Alabama, is it reminds me of what Purdue looked like after Jeff Brom took over, like in game 1. And I remember watching that game. I think I want to say they even played freaking Louisville, that opening game they had. And it just, everything looked competent. And if you had, I think this was it 2017, I want to say? Yeah, it was 2017 because I saw Purdue play Wisconsin in 2016, and that was the one where I think Bradrick Shaw had 2 touchdowns. It was probably 28-0 at halftime. TJ Watt had a pick 6 from the 10-yard line. And everything about Purdue that season and pretty much in the Hazel era looked discombobulated. And if you had a talented player or two, just none of it ever looked coherent. And I'm sorry, but that's pretty much what Wisconsin's looked like for the last 2 years.
right.
And whether that's on offense or defense, because frankly, I think it's been both. And I don't know, like longtime listeners or people I talk to in real life that hear what I say on here are going to be surprised. But I think everything, or they're going to be miffed at me for saying, well, that's not what you said before. But everything with under the Longo system, up and even in year 2, it's like it looked coherent and tentative, or incoherent and tentative. And you see a big play every now and again from some talented players like Vinny Anthony or Trutch, or nice rip off a nice run from one of the running backs, but it never looked coherent. And it was always just like, what the and I think a lot of this now has to do with what Grimes wants to do, which he started doing right away from practice 1. Is going back to something that looks a little bit more familiar to fans, for one thing, or watchers, I should say. But and this one is kind of, I'm ripping this off from another source, just for the words, but I think it kind of puts words to what I saw, and what I'm thinking is that the players look like they're just playing more. Like they're not thinking about things. They're not waiting for things to happen. Or with the Longo thing, you're waiting for receivers to come open and run the right route and be in the right spot. And you had a trigger man with Locke, who's, I mean, I don't know what system he would thrive in anyway. But now they got a guy like Billy Edwards who seems, I don't know, almost supremely confident, right?
Yes.
Right. And there's that. And it's, we talked about it last time, and I don't know if I'm smelling my own farts, but it really did kind of occur to me that I find like putting resourcefulness, and a lot of people liked your Jack Cohn as the Camry of quarterbacks. A lot of people liked that one.
Oh, really?
So I'm gonna, yes.
I didn't get this feedback. I'm glad that
I don't. Yeah, no, I did for sure.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about a resourceful quarterback, I think that's really like the thing that's been missing for so long. And it really makes things hum. You need a game manager, yeah, but you need somebody who's resourceful. I think they have that in Billy Edwards, from what you can tell.
Mm-hmm.
And I think his maturity level, I mean, Mordecai had that, but that offensive system didn't allow for much resourcefulness, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think what I'm getting, and especially from the receivers too, when you see these, maybe it's against the second team defense, or maybe it's something, but they're like completing passes downfield. And you hear about Tanner Kozel and what he's going to do. I'm really excited to see how that's going to work. And having 2 tight ends on the field when you have seemingly a relatively talented group, and the personnel, I think is going to work for what Grimes wants to do. And there's going to be just less thinking and more playing.
Okay.
And I think it's going to just have that look. And I know you and I talked about this, and we were on the air back then. But just that, even from game 1, like the opening drive of Purdue 2017 with Brom, it looked like a whole different team. Like everything was different. It looked competent and confident and coherent. And the whole vibe was different. Like the whole vibe was different. And, Brom carried it all the way through, even through a lot of, injuries to really good players.
Mm-hmm.
But it always looked like that with Brom. And I think I think Grimes is a similar type of mind that way.
Okay.
So that's really, about offense. I think it look from what you can tell. I mean, but it looks just more coherent and more confident and more competent.
Yeah, no, I think the offensive thing to me, the things that piqued my interest about the offense, one, I do think it's interesting that it's Billy Edwards is QB1 right in the door. Like this, not even we're having a competition. They weren't this direct with Mordecai or explicit, whatever term you want to use. I feel like in that first year, as they have been with Billy Edwards, which I think is notable. And I do think that my new favorite term on this podcast that everybody's sick of, it ties into this urgency thing. Like, again, why Phil Longo was gone was the lack of urgency. And now it's like, oh no, I got to get, Fickell being psychotically competitive in everything he does. It's, I have to fix this now. And this has to be working now. It's, well, look, I got my starting quarterback. There's no pretense to this. This has been laid out to these guys coming in. They know what the deal is. Billy Edwards, you're the starter. And then with Billy Edwards, you get the sense like this is a guy not dissimilar to Mordecai, where it's, I'm looking to take my NFL shot and I need, when you've heard him interviewed and articulating decisions and where he went, it's, this gives me the best option to show how I could function in an offense at the next level. I am not using the phrase NFL style ever, especially in air quotes. I don't know why we need to put it in air quotes, people. We don't need to do that. That's my PSA for the day, because I can't take NFL style anymore. We need a new thing, or at least take off the air quotes. Need something new. Anyways, but so I get all of that is like, Billy Edwards is like, this is it. This is my last shot. I got to get this right. They come right out, practice one. Clearly, he's been working with people because they're pretty far in on the install and how they've dedicated time. I mean, Fickell said this winter, it was like we did a little more in terms of getting install done, getting them where they need to be, less about fundamental drills, that kind of thing, because again, urgency. The other thing that I think is interesting on the offensive side has been most of the talk about receivers outside of tight end has been guys like Ballard and Vinny Anthony, mostly on the deep shot stuff, right? Like it's those outside guys taking the top off the defense. And what intrigues me about that, not so much is Jaden Ballard going to be great or is Vinny Anthony going to be great? It's that the injury to Tretch is interesting because if there's a guy who I say, okay, he's athletic and he has a skill set, but I don't quite get how it works. If they're going to be as tight end heavy as they say, I want to understand what his role is going to be, because like, I don't see how it projects. Like there's guys I get how it projects, like Darian Dupree. Darian Dupree, I think they are hoping becomes the poor man's Curtis Samuel on Ohio State. Like if you look at his progression in his career, like his last year on that team, I think he caught 70 passes and he ran the ball 70 times. And like they moved him all over the field. He was not a running back. He was not a wide receiver. He was just this thing, right?
I wouldn't even say poor man's. I think they were probably the same rated. And I know Samuel played in the NFL, but I think Dupree has that kind of potential.
Well, I mean, that guy was a really good football player. I'm not putting anything on him.
100%. Yeah.
But that's the kind of player they are looking for. Like a guy that's kind of this hybrid-y, move him around thing, do different things with him.
Tretch, and I don't know if Tretch can be Percy Harvin.
No, like I don't think Tretch can be a running back. I mean, that I don't see Tretch being like, how do you get Tretch to be an outside guy, right? Like, how do you get him to be that X? I don't know. So is it going to be more 11 personnel for him, or like, how do you keep him in the mix, especially when he's out until fall, right?
Yeah, I know. And he's such like a instinctual type guy that, he gets the ball in his hands and he knows what to do with it. How to get the ball in his hands is the major question with him. I wonder, as soon as you said that, actually, the first person that popped in my head is I think that's what people expected with Aaron Cruikshank.
Yes.
And I remember when they played Ohio State in 2019 that I'm pretty sure he had, I don't know if it was a swing pass or a direct snap out of the backfield. against Ohio State, and it went for like 40 yards. And that, if you remember that 2019 game, it was in the rain. It was the game after they lost to Illinois. And you're kind of like, there had to be some kind of spark there. And, Cruikshank was, this AC Hollywood, as the Hollywood Brown thing. You remember all that?
Yep.
Like going into the 2019 season, and it kind of never panned out. But I think, like in body style and speed, I think Trutch is a pretty similar player.
A little less lanky, I think, but yeah.
Maybe more compact.
They both have the same compact is a good word limitation, which is the reason they weren't higher up in that sort of recruiting pecking order is measurables. It's the height, it's the size.
Right.
So it's figuring out how to work around that and use them.
And both of them with the ball in their hands were just absolutely electric.
Yeah.
Both of them. But so I don't know. And that was, with Cruikshank, that was in a Christ offense, which I think there's a lot of similarities to what Grimes does. It's not a 1-to-1 or, pro style.
Right.
or something like that. But there's a lot of similarities. And I think, just back then, I remember, the whole thing with AC was they have this X guy, he could be an X factor in every game, and you kind of got a glimpse of it versus Ohio State. So maybe that's something with Trutch. But to your point with the injuries, with his injury in the spring, I'm really interested to see where the rest of the snaps go. Kai Barry Johnson, or Hilton. And I think Hilton's one of those guys that can play
early,
inside, outside, whatever. I think he's I think he's the best wide receiver prospect they brought in since Quintez Cephas.
You know what he reminds me of, and this is going to be a bad comp, but I think it's mostly because his issues weren't so much on the field. Marcus Allen. That's who he reminds me of.
Oh,
like
that's
when you saw that guy and you're like,
sure.
ooh, that guy is different.
Yeah.
He just he fizzled because of whatever reason. He seemed to have a lot of stuff going on there.
A couple different schools.
Yes, a couple different schools. A little too much. Wasn't he arrested on Mifflin?
Oh, I think he was.
Yes,
yeah.
wasn't he the one?
Hey, man, God bless you for doing that. I know a lot of people that happens.
Well,
I'm surprised I never was.
But not everybody was. I think it was him, the one he was arrested with a gun in his backpack.
That's true. I don't know a lot of people that were arrested for that on Mifflin Street, but I saw a lot of nitrous tanks, things like that.
Right.
But Marcus Allen's a pretty interesting comp. I think the thing with Hilton's really interesting too, just because he grew up in it. And it's not like when you see him, it's not like his dad was more like a Trutch guy.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit bigger. I think where Ty was probably like 6'0".
Yeah, I mean, like on the NFL scale of little guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, definitely. But he was one of those guys that was absolutely electric with the ball in his hand.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I'm interested to see. And if they can do that, and if you have some possession type guys like a Chris Brooks and a Mark Hamper, people like that, I think this could be really, really interesting, especially if all those other guys become competent blockers, which Vinny Anthony you wouldn't think of, but he is a competent blocker.
Okay. What about the defense?
All right. So on the defensive side, I mean, there's one guy from last year really that played who's in there now? Ben Barton?
Yeah, right.
One guy.
Yeah.
One guy. And there's guys like Willer that are in the program, Dylan Johnson who's in the program. We'll see what they do. But other than that, like everything is completely new.
Well, Brandon Lane is still around.
Brandon Lane, that's true.
Yeah.
See how I forgot about him?
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing, what's the one guy that you hear about the most? His birthday's today because I saw it on Twitter from the Wisconsin Football.
Okay. I still don't know.
That would be Charles Perkins.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take it. I mean, as long as somebody's percolating up.
But I think it just goes to say, too, and I wonder, all those guys transferred to Illinois. Like Kurt Niels. Who else? It was, what's his name?
James Thompson.
James Thompson. Yeah. And I don't know if they were problematic, which is kind of the rumblings that you hear, that they weren't, that they weren't bought in, whatever. But that thing is completely retooled. And the whole outside linebacker thing with Willer and, we talked about it last time. That's pretty interesting too. And I don't know if that was kind of meant to get them more under Mitchell's tutelage or have him expand a little bit more his duties.
Yeah.
And as I was, again, some of that's from other material been listening to. But that, what was Tressel really good at? What's he always been really, really good at?
You're asking me
backs.
all these rhetorical questions that I don't have answers to. Yeah.
Defensive backs.
Yeah. Okay. You're saying like, what did they bring from Cincinnati?
He presided.
Yeah.
No, he also presided over the freaking no-fly zone.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's always been a defensive back guy, and whether he's the guy, I think the last 2 years have kind of shown that, I don't know. I mean, I hate doing this because, the guy's forgotten more about football than I know, and I'm just a fan with a microphone, but he's not really good at scheme and personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think whatever they had, with a guy like Hunter Wohler that could clean up a lot that they didn't even have for the last 3 games, last 3 games, whatever, games that you expected them to win. Okay. That there was you couldn't make up for it, and whether I know we're going to get into this, but as far as the lack of talent, pretty much from the front to the back, outside of Wohler and outside of, Hallman and Forkrian, I don't know if that's something where Tressel's been left to focus more on the defensive backs and Mitchell's the front 7 guy.
So the Mitchell thing, and you know what, maybe. Well,
do you think maybe we could get him on to ask him these questions?
You just got me to my second. We'll ask for him again. Let's see if we can get him again.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck he would say, but I think he'd be happy to come on like he was last year, and yeah, he was a great interview last year.
But to your point, so like the position as they've sort of articulated, don't view some of these guys as quote unquote outside linebackers. That's just what room they're in. So it's like, what do they have all in common? I don't know, because obviously you have, they talked about Daryl Peterson bulking up, and he's not going to be TJ Watt, right? Which he would never was and is never going to be. So you're like, okay, he's more in the Aaron Witt mold. But these guys feel like they're sort of sliding in and taking that like edge setter role away with just a heavier body. So we'll ask. Yeah. So yes, again, one of our things to watch was 300-pound outside linebackers, WTF.
Right.
I feel like we're still in the WTF phase, which I think I have a little bit of color to, but we'll see.
Sure.
The other part you bring up, which I am still trying to figure out, was my Dylan Johnson barometer. And I don't know how I feel about this yet.
Sure. Well, it's incomplete. You don't have much to go on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll see. That's all TBD. I mean, there isn't much mystery, I feel like, in the secondary. You know who the players are. They have to try to figure out the Hunter Wohler side of things. They have options, and we'll just see how that plays out, because it's going to be committee.
I don't know if they have a guy like that's that good. And they have two plus corners, but I don't know if they have a plus safety. They have plus athletes at safety. I'm really interested to see how Matt Young will fit in there. Mm-hmm. And he seems like the kind of guy that could be, I don't know, maybe I'm jumping the gun, but he seems like he could be a plus safety at this level.
We'll see. I think you're jumping the gun.
Yeah, probably. But
we'll see. All right. I think that's enough well, I shouldn't say exposition, but that's enough speculation.
Yeah, I don't think that's the right word.
Yeah. I was looking for a big word, Max.
Talking out of our ear? I don't know.
Other places too. But let's do this. You and I, as we said, we have been thinking about how to do this show. And again, we weren't around last week because there wasn't much to talk about. So we were doing a little digging and thinking and all this. And I said, Max, I have an idea. We have, by the way, for everyone who knows, 34777-BUCKY is not only the talk around, it is also the text around, because you can text message us on there if that's your preferred method of getting us a
I'm going to steal from Bill King. It's a call text option line.
All right, there you go. So if you ever want to send us a question, you don't feel like writing an email, because these days that's like breaking out your quill. It's like, let me send a letter of introduction to so-and-so. Like, I mean, that's a very formal setting. Like, you are sitting down to email, responding on social media. Maybe you don't have it. You don't have to do it.
We needed YouTube for that. Like the YouTube version, just for your face right there.
Oh.
Because it went with the accent.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. was good.
It's like very Amadeus was what I was going
yes,
for.
it was expressive.
So yeah, 34777 Bucky, you can just text us your questions. That we get them. We can't really reply to them quickly, and we're not going to, but we will see them and we may use them as this demonstrates, because we have a text. They didn't give their name, but we're just going to say area code 317 sent us this. So area code 317, who sent us this question like 2 or 3 months ago, you floated up to the surface. Congratulations. So let me read this, and then I'll walk you through, well, the weird things I was doing the last couple days to try to answer this question. So the question is as follows. Hello, love the show. I'm curious, when comparing Jim Leonhard and Mike Tressel, I'm not sure on a personnel versus scheme argument as a cause for the delta we see in performance. What about comparing, say, the 2022 Iowa game versus the 2024 Iowa game and looking at the number of snaps in 2-4-5, in other fronts, etc.? Maybe it's too much work. Maybe just look at the first 20 snaps. What do you think? Well, sir or madam at 317, it is not too much work. I decided to do a little something just because it was quiet. And as people know, I'm not exactly a basketball fan. So I have, other pursuits that fill the void when there's a week off from spring practice. And I did a little digging. And what I ended up doing was pulling up where I could find full game film for 3 different Badger games. One was this most recent exciting 42-10 drubbing against Iowa, the 2024 game, where Iowa passed the ball 10 times and scored 42 points.
Trust me, my man, it was harder in person.
Yeah. The other one was the 2017 Badger victory, where Wisconsin won 38-14. That looks like an absolute blowout, but it really wasn't until the end, where one young Alex Hornibrook managed to throw not 1, but 2 pick sixes in a game for all of Iowa's points. Jonathan Taylor also had a fumble. There were 4 Badger turnovers in total. Nate Stanley, noted Iowa quarterback, had 1.7 yards per attempt in the game. And then on the defensive side, the Badgers played without Dakota Dixon, who was hurt for that game. So Joe Ferguson was sort of that starting off safety in there. And then the third game,
Chris Orr was out as well.
Mm-hmm. And then the third game.
Before you get to the third game, though, the one thing I do want to add to that game. Well, I have 2 things, actually. Wisconsin was number 8 and undefeated.
Okay.
And it was the game right after Iowa beat the living snot out of Ohio State, 55-14.
Was that one or 2018? I can't remember.
No, 2018. Okay. 2018 was Purdue's crack at Ohio State with 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, and I think 3 of them were Rondale Moore. But no. I didn't realize that. Looking back at the 2017 game, I remember this and that about it, especially the extremely, absolutely. It was the least amount of yards in a game that Wisconsin gave up in a Big Ten game ever. And it was the second least amount that they've given up in any game. And Iowa was coming off of a game where they put up 55 points against Ohio State.
All right. Yeah. And then the last game I looked at was another Jim Leonhard game, was the 2018 game. Because the 2017 game, when you watched it, you're like, oh, this one's a little weird, just because Iowa's offense is so bad. I watched the 2018 game, which honestly, you have Alex Hornibrook's worst game probably as a Badger is that 2017 game. Bookended with the 2018 Iowa game, which I guess next to the Miami Bowl game, you could argue is one of his best, where he was 17 for 22, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. Had a couple really nice snap throws. And an interesting game because they don't go ahead until very late in the fourth quarter. I mean, it's 21-17. Yes. They're down 17-14 well into the fourth quarter. And
the final was because Alec Ingold got a garbage time touchdown. Yeah, but it made it when you looked at the final score.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, it was a lot closer than the final.
So it was a tight game, and both offenses were operating sort of like within their ideal, like they weren't, either trying to grind clock or trying to stretch the field to catch up like Iowa was trying to do in 17 and then obviously grind clock in 2024 as that one got out of hand. But the big takeaway for me, if you want color on the 2018 game when you rewatch it, It just reminded me that I am a Tyler Johnson truther. And man, if that guy didn't get hurt, because Andrew Van
You
Ginkel
mentioned that in the notes. Yeah,
Mhm.
I vaguely remember that.
Andrew Van Ginkel was hurt and limited, and Tyler Johnson
Okay.
played a lot. And far from a finished, polished player, but wow, he was like, oh, that was going to be the next one. Like it was so clear he was going to be the next one, and I feel vindicated.
That's also the last time the Badgers won at Kinnick.
Clearly, it's Tyler Johnson. That's what you need. So let's do this. Here, let me walk you through what I decided to do, and then I can walk everybody through what I found, because I promised this on social media. There's pivot tables today.
There will be pivot tables.
So I charted some stuff from all three of these games. I looked at the defense. I looked at every snap on defense. Kind of had to make a decision on whether or not to, like, if there was a penalty on a play, like did I get rid of it? There's like a personal foul at the end of the play. Do I use it? How do I judge things? Blah, 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 blah. But I went through every snap and I charted, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 things. First thing I charted was how many, I called them wide receivers, but what it really could be is I charted how many players Iowa put wide, like outside of the box on offense every snap. So if they lined up 2 wide receivers, I put 2. If they put Noah Fant out on the hash, way off the line, I counted him as a wide receiver. Just how many bodies they put outside that the Badgers then had to account for. I then charted on the defensive side of the ball, and I'll get to why I did that with receivers in a bit, how many defensive linemen the Badgers had on the field, how many inside linebackers they had on the field, how many outside linebackers they had on the field, and then how many defensive backs they ended up putting in the box. And then, obviously, a summation there of how many box players did the Badgers have? Because, as Mr. or Miss 317 had asked, was it just really like were the Badgers just lighter in these games? Like, is that really why they were just getting gashed? Is that sort of the answer?
And that was a lot of the talk after the 2024 game. Too.
Yeah, definitely. So, as they like to say on television, the answer may surprise you. So, first off, if you just look at these 3 years and you look at the percentage of snaps, because they all played roughly the same number. It was like between 50 and 60 defensive snaps in each game. So I'll just use percentages because it's simpler. In 2017, so when the Badgers basically suffocated that Iowa offense, they had 3 defensive linemen on the field 44% of the time. In 2018, and basically in a old-fashioned, more or less old-school 3-4, right? Like what you and I and everybody thinks of, like you turn on Madden 98, if you're old like us, you remembered what the 3-4 looked like on your Sega Genesis. That's what they were playing, right? In 2018, notably, they were in a 3-down lineman look almost 70% of the time. And then in 2024, the Badgers were in a 3-down lineman look only 54. Well, actually, round it up, 55% of the time. It's 54.5% for those keeping score at home. So again, if you take 2017 and you say, well, that's a weird game because they kind of blew it out, and even though they kind of didn't, but I mean, Iowa's offense was so incompetent, they were struggling to find a solution. You say, well, yeah, look, I mean, Jim Leonhard was in a 3-down look, almost 15% more. They were in a 3-down look 70% of the time. And then Jim Tressel's only in it 55% of the time. And then looking at 2024, they had a 2-down lineman look 41% of the time, versus in 2018, they were in a 2-down line look only 27% of the time. So you're like, aha, there's your answer. And so I said, well, all right, let's take that for a second. And we're going to do a little filter on this. Max, we're going to do some pivot table magic here. And what we're going to do is we're going to filter out the garbage time, right? Because I also tracked, I didn't mention that at the top, score differential at the time of the play. I also had down distance, all that stuff, but not important for the moment. If you take out when the Badgers were down by 18 or more points, or when they were up by 17 or more, in 17 and 18, you say, all right, how does this look different? And it really doesn't change a ton. So you go, okay, well, now in 2024, they're in the 3-down look 44% of the time. Doesn't really matter, I guess, which is interesting. And they are looking lighter, right? So they go from it was 55% of the time they were in 3 down linemen, and now they're at 44. So sorry, I said that poorly. Yeah, no, it gets even lighter. So when they're not in garbage time, they are only in 3 down line looks 44% of the time. Right to the point of this, like, look, they are too light. They are not playing heavy enough. And you start to say, boy, this looks like it's leading somewhere. Because if you control for that 2017 season where they were up, three scores, they now are in 3 down looks a majority of the time. They're in it 52% of the time versus before when they were in it, 40 something like that?
44.
There you go. So, oh my gosh, like these numbers are moving apart, and you're starting to see that trend form where Jimmy Leonard is clearly heavier against Iowa. And I will say this, as you're watching the game, you're like, boy, I see 3 down linemen here more than I tend to remember. Because when I think of Jim Leonard defenses, I think of 2 down linemen most of the time. So you start to say, boy, this is starting to paint me a picture and tell me a story. But there is something else, if you watch these 3 games in succession, that catches your eye. And I'm going to give you a little hint. It involves the last name Ferentz. And you know what that hint is? It involves the fact that there is a Ferentz who isn't in one of these games. And it's not Kurt. It's Brian. And what's interesting is to look at these look at Iowa and how they use what I, again, called wide receivers, but guys split wide, because you see a change. And that's what's really fascinating to me. So in 2017, Iowa used 2 or fewer wide receivers. I need to see my sums here. 46% of the time. In 2024, they also used 2 or fewer receivers 45.5% of the time. And I think with the numbers we're dealing with, we'll call that the same, right? Sure. So what's intriguing is you go, wait a minute. 2017, they couldn't do jack on offense, and they lost by 24 points. And then this past year, they blew the doors off this game and won by 32, and they're running 2 wide receiver sets the same percentage of the time. So you say, all right, well, let's look at the sort of like the baseline Leonard game, and that's 2018. And in 2018, Iowa ran an offense with 2 or fewer wide receivers 70% of the time. Like 7 out of 10 snaps on offense was 2 receivers, 1 wide receiver, or none. Now the none were primarily down on the goal line a few times, and then 1 or 2 short yardage ones they ran, but they were very heavy, very, sort of like the old school 12 personnel, that kind of thing. Like what you're going to see the Badgers doing more of now. Like they really leaned into that. So I said to myself,
what you think of when you think of Iowa?
Yeah. So what I said to myself was, wait a minute, maybe there's a little bit more of a story here. Like maybe like the lighter boxes we're seeing aren't because of Mike Tressel. Maybe it's responding to what you saw from Iowa. Because the one thing I will say when you watch the Jim Leonard versus the Mike Tressel defense, Jim Leonard's defenses had 3 looks. Like you saw a base, 3-4. Again, and this is against Iowa in the right. 2 games you watch. You right. saw a base 3-4 and you saw a 2-4-5. And then I think, I'm not exaggerating, maybe 1 snap, we had like Jim Leonard's version of the dollar, if you will, which was, you had Ryan Connolly on one edge, you had TJ Edwards on the other edge, you had 1 defensive lineman, I think it was Sheehy, and then the outside linebackers actually inside. Like it was a dollar. It really was sort of like a proto dollar, but just a different look. And he used it maybe 3 snaps a game. But you only really saw, again, to go back, those 2 main looks and that one sprinkled in. And I said, so wait a minute. Let's see when he used 3 down linemen and when he used 2 down linemen. So here's what I then did a comparison of. When Iowa ran out there with 2 wide receivers or less, right? So you had, just 2 wide receivers. But it doesn't matter if you do 2 wide receivers or less. So if you had 2 wide receivers or less in 2017, Jim Leonard marched out with 3 defensive linemen 94% of the time. In 2018, when Iowa marched out with 2 wide receivers or less, Jim Leonard had 3 defensive linemen out there 90% of the time. And now let's get ready for the big sea change. When Mike Tressel showed up in 2024 and Iowa marched out there with 2 wide receivers or less, oh wait, he also put 3 D linemen out there 90% of the time. It's like the dead same number.
Right.
And now here's the other part that I think is really interesting. If you look when Iowa put more than 2 wide receivers on the field, so 3, 4, or 5, which again, just to review, in 2018 was on 30% of snaps, but in 2024 was on 54% of snaps. So like a big jump. So
and not what you'd think of Iowa.
No.
That's Tim Lester, Iowa.
But that was Tim Lester.
Not Brian Ferentz, Iowa.
So in 2017, when Iowa had 3 or more wide receivers, Wisconsin had 2 D linemen on the field 92% of the time. In 2018, when they had more than 2 on there, they had 2 D linemen on the field 75% of the time. 3 D linemen 24, again, because they didn't care about the pass. I mean, that's my take. Why there's a drop there.
Yeah.
They're like, we're going to take the run. We're going to try and take the run in this thing.
Right.
And then in 2024, when they had 3 wide receivers under Mike Tressel, 81. So he falls right in between. Like he's right on the guardrails. And in one of those situations, he was in $1. So when they went wide, he's really like 82, if you want to call the dollar his thing there. But not a significant difference. Like, again, you saw, like, Mike Tressel has a lot of different looks, way more than Leonard had. You can argue whether that's right or not. And you can argue, like, I think it's safe to say Jim Leonard is probably a better defensive coordinator than Mike Tressel, but I don't know that it's like, well, it's because he's only marching out 2 guys. No, like,
right.
They matched their personnel. They did the same thing where actually our old friend Matt Singer had the line, which was, when Chikwe would just sit there next to Leonard and it's like, oh, you see the team is going to be 2 wide receivers and like Chikwe runs in and then this, the nickel comes out. Like Tressel's doing the same thing that Jimmy Leonard did.
I'm so glad you mentioned Big Cheeks. We'll get into that.
Yeah. But where the difference is obvious, and this is where you end up like, you can do all this stuff and you can pivot these numbers and you look at that. But like when you watch every snap and you're like, you pause it and you're counting everybody up. And then you're like, okay, this is all done. Now let me get to the next play. Well, like, while I'm reformatting, I'll just hit play and let the play run. And I'm doing it on, one screen here and one screen there. And so you're not missing it. It's in your peripheral. It screams at you in your peripheral. It's that obvious. Is the difference in the players on the front 7. Like it's stark. So
it is. That's the word that we were using in the pregame.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the word I was using.
I mean,
yes.
The thing you can't forget, I will say this, watching the 2 Iowa games, you are reminded, it's fun to see it when you're reminded like, oh my gosh, I forgot how good TJ Edwards was as a football, just unbelievable football player.
Oh, just wait.
And then you're like, oh yeah, there's Ryan Connolly right next to him, who is, like maybe the 4th best linebacker this school has ever had.
Right. So yeah, I was gonna say, so I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna do a little, my part of this exercise, okay? But I do want to preface it by saying, let's look at Iowa. I already talked about the fact that in 2017 they were coming off of that 55-point win against Ohio State, which no Badger team that I'm aware of has done that, except maybe with Ron Dane. Maybe like Ron Dane's freshman year. And that offense also that was when they had Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson.
Yeah, they had 2 first-round draft picks in it all.
Yeah. I think the Iowa offensive line in 2017 and 2018 were decent. They were good like they usually are.
Rough on the tackles, but yes.
Yeah,
they had some young tackles on one of those teams.
Yeah, and I think that might have been like Wirf's sophomore year, like his first year as a starter, something like that. So the 2024 offensive line for Iowa, I think, is probably the best one they've had in probably the last 2, 3, 4 years, including Logan Jones. Who's like, if he didn't win the Remington Award, he was like one of the finalists, I'm pretty sure. Tight ends, fine. Obviously, the quarterback didn't throw the ball, but 2024 Iowa, this is before I get to Wisconsin. 2024 Iowa also had who's I think is the second coming of freaking Melvin Gordon and Caleb Johnson. Like Caleb Johnson is just like freaking Melvin Gordon.
Okay.
He's the dude who got the ball all the time. Everybody knew he was going to get the ball all the time and did. And he plays, he looks, he's like Melvin Gordon. So that's one thing if you're going to look at 2024 that compare it to all these other ones. Iowa usually has a good back, but let's Akram Wadley, he ain't no Caleb Johnson. Like
No.
Caleb Johnson's going to be like after Jeanty, he's going to be the second running back off the freaking draft board. All right. So flipping back over to Wisconsin, and here's where my exercise starts. So I looked at the roster for 2017, which has a lot of the same players that would be on the 2018 roster as well, 1 year before they emerged. So I'm just going to go over the defensive linemen really quick. And you tell me, NFL draft or both. Starting with the nose tackle, who has always been a Buck-Around favorite in 2017, Olive Sangapole.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an Olive anywhere near this team right now?
No, and
Last
the
year?
interesting thing to me about Olive is like I always think of him as he was good, but he was nothing amazing. Like I
No.
liked him,
Well, and the answer is no draft, no NFL, right?
But
But he
blows
did it-
the doors off.
He's a
of
nose
anybody.
tackle that could do a backflip.
Oh, they showed that in the game. There was a lot of the like memory. I got to see that. I got to see Jonathan Taylor do the sprint. It was like, oh yeah, all these things.
So he's 2017 as a junior, 2018 as a senior.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's basically like the dude. And if there was a backup, it was Gunnar Roberts, who really wasn't, not an impact player, but I think he'd be getting playing time on this team.
Well, Bryson Williams was there, I think, wasn't he?
He's not on the roster in 20,
Oh, okay.
and so 2017 I'm going with.
But I
all
don't
right?
remember seeing him. Yeah.
Yeah. So big cheeks.
Yep.
And I don't know if I'm sure he was in a camp, but he didn't get drafted. I don't think he played much in the NFL.
No.
But he was an excellent player, as we've discussed many, many, many times. All right. Alec James. And they were both seniors. This was 2017 was their senior year.
Yep.
Alec James, team captain. So a lot of the things interesting about 2017 too is it's kind of the last of the Anderson players that still stayed around and they were seniors. So like, Levi was a junior, but James and Cheeks, those were Anderson era players
Right.
and they were seniors. Okay. Garrett Rand is a sophomore. So he didn't really come into his own, I don't think, until he was a senior or even a fifth year senior. But I'm sure he got snaps in 2017, 2018 as like, I don't know, the 6th or 7th defensive lineman. Okay. Matt Henningsen, true freshman in 2017. Again, 5th or 6th level guy, drafted and plays in the NFL
Mm-hmm.
as a walk-on. Connor Sheehy,
Yep.
senior, 2017. We've already talked about Connor Sheehy. Very solid player, was not drafted, but I know he was in the Packers training camp, if I'm not mistaken. Billy Hirschfeld, Isaiah Loudermilk as a freshman. I know he got snaps in 2017. I don't know if he did against Iowa, but by 2018, he was already firmly part of the rotation, was drafted, and still plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers on, I believe, his second contract. Okay. Next one of note. So those are the defensive linemen. So let's look at the linebackers. You've already mentioned Ryan Connolly,
Mm-hmm.
undrafted, or no, he's
Drafted late.
walk on, but drafted in the
Yeah.
4th round by the New York Giants. Likely still be playing if he wasn't hurt. And like you said, he's probably one of the top 10 best linebackers in Wisconsin history. Okay, Ryan Connolly, Jack Sitchie was still on the roster in 2017.
Yeah, but he was hurt.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Was it 2016 that he was out for, or 2017?
He was 17. He didn't play in that game.
It was. Okay, so to clarify that. Anyway, TJ Edwards, we've already addressed him, but in 2017, he was a first-team All-American.
Mhm.
First-team All-American, Big Ten linebacker of the year. Didn't have him in 2018, of course, and obviously he's had one hell of a pro career after being undrafted, just like he was a walk-on, I think, when he came into the program in Anderson's first or second year. Chris Orr didn't play in 2017. But he was a sophomore, so I'm sure he played in 2018. Chris Orr, right? I think he'd get playing time in this defense, right? Nowadays.
Yeah, but the only thing I would say with Chris Orr, which again goes back to, I think, the difference between the Leonards and the Tressels is Jim Leonard found a way to use Chris Orr that minimized his limitations. Because I don't think Chris Orr is necessarily a better football. He's honestly he's like Muma. He reminds me of Muma. Smart guy,
sure.
not super athletic.
And out of the names I'm reading, he's like 10th, 11th, 12th. Yeah.
I mean, and also just to
doubt
keep
about
in
it.
mind, he was behind TJ Edwards and Ryan Connolly in 2018. He played, I'm looking at the game, he played 18 snaps.
Yeah, okay. All right. Mike Mascalunas is a freshman. I don't know if
Didn't
he played
play.
or not. Yeah,
No.
I'm sure not, but he eventually became a starter. Okay, so now we're going to go on to outside linebackers. Garrett Dooley is a senior in 27. Okay, I think he came on, as it turned out, I think he turned out to be a very good player who'd be playing a lot in this system right now. I think he's second team All-Pro. Andrew Van Ginkel, first year with the program in 2017. Know what he did in 2018, and then 2019 was his last year, right? Or did he get drafted after that?
I think it was
after 2018. Either way, second team All-Pro, long-time NFL career, drafted.
Yeah, and he was sprinkled in. So in 17, he was like rotational.
Right.
18, he was hurt. That was when you had.
That's right.
He played like 5 or 6 snaps.
That's right. Okay. Next one on the list, Zach Bond. He was a sophomore in 2017. So he's a junior in 2018. First team All-Pro, Super Bowl champion. And then your buddy Tyler Johnson. So, I mean, the talent disparity between those it's beyond stark in terms of what Leonard had to work with. And that doesn't even talk about, like, in 2017, they had Latrell Jamerson was drafted. Nick Nelson was drafted. Dakota Dixon was hurt in 2017, but he wound up being an all Big Ten level player in 2018.
Yeah, he didn't play in 17. That's when Joe Ferguson played.
Yeah, right. So that's what I said. Yeah. So there's that. And I saw today that, like, it's getting towards draft season, a month away, and the Badgers will likely have 2 offensive linemen like Joe Huber, Jack Nelson, whether they'll be 3rd, 4th, 5th round guys, whatever. I think they'd be lucky to be in the 3rd, but whatever. And then the only player on defense is Hunter Wohler, and he's probably 6th, 7th round guy.
Yeah.
As talented as he is, first team All Big Ten last year. If you look at last year, how many players did they have drafted off their defense? None. It was Tanner Bortolini and Braylon Allen. So I think you're looking at a lot of apples and oranges. And I kind of started my comments on this with Caleb Johnson, that the 2024 Iowa offense was probably as good as Iowa's offense has been for the last couple of years. So put that in this little mix. But the fact that you have from this front 7 that's going to play this year compare it to 2024, most of them are gone for a reason. I mean, there's just, you can't, the numbers that you told, I think really, if there was after the 2024 game and about, not playing heavy enough, I think the numbers alone have exonerated him. At least on that, on that particular allegation against him. But I said it before, I think, scheme and personnel wise, I don't think Trustle's been great as a defensive coordinator. I don't think I'm going out on a limb saying that. I'm not saying that he can't be, but he hasn't been. But he didn't have nearly the personnel to work with that Jim Leonard had.
Yeah, I mean,
like, it's not even in the same universe. So I don't know. I mean, it's an indictment of the program either way, but I mean, the talent that they respectively had to work with isn't even the same. It's not even apples and oranges. It's like apples and spinach.
Yeah. So I think
apples and pork.
Where I end up, especially on the, again, watching 1, 2, 3 and bang, bang, bang in the front 7, I feel like Elijah Hills would have a role on their defense. But again,
we're going to come back to right. Yeah.
He'd be down in, like looking at 2018. They, Loudermilk played 45 snaps, and then you had Caden Lyles and Matt Henningsen sort of rotating on the other side. And that was a young Matt. That was back when we were like, oh my God, I don't need to see any more Matt Henningsen.
That was true sophomore walk-on Matt Henningsen.
I think he was redshirt freshman, I think.
Or redshirt, redshirt freshman.
I think this is doesn't matter, but you got the idea. I feel like Elijah Hills would have been in that mix because you had Caden Lyles playing out of position, basically just to be sort of a guy to take up space. So I feel like he could have been in that rotation somewhere because that was, again, after Chikwe and after Alex James left. So maybe he would be in that mix somewhere. I think Christian Allegro would be around where Chris Orr had snapped. Like Chris Orr had 18 snaps in 2018. I mean, I don't think they played. Let me look. They played Mike Mascalunas 4 snaps and Arrington Farrar 4 snaps. I think at the end of the game.
I'm sure.
Or they were in a goal line formation. One of the two.
I'm trying to think though. How many snaps did Allegro play in 2024 against Iowa?
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm just saying he would have similar snaps to Orr.
Well, and I'm just trying to
played
think
18 out of 55.
Because Allegro really started getting his snap count higher on account of an injury this year.
That's when he played in that game. Was because
right. And was that the first game like that?
Yeah, because that was where what's his face was hurt.
Yeah, because I think he had like 19 tackles or something, or 18 tackles.
But I mean, like, so I look at him. Yeah, it's something like that. But I mean, I look at him, and it was Jaheim Thomas. I don't know why I couldn't think of Jaheim Thomas.
Jaheim Thomas, yeah.
But yeah, Jaheim Thomas was hurt, so Allegro basically became the starter, and he's the only one who I could be like, okay, I could see him as like the rotational guy in the back. That's also why when I look at the front seven of this defense, like he's a guy who's playing before he should. So you got to think of him more like a Chris Orr, where Chris Orr you didn't see as much of, and they limited his exposure, whereas he's been pushed to the fore for better or worse, just because. The tricky part, which is, again, to what you said about
2016 Ryan Connolly. I'm sorry.
Okay. But the tricky part is the secondary, right? Because Hunter Wohler would play on those teams. I think Hunter Wohler's probably a better player than Dakota Dixon, more versatile. Dakota Dixon was a little more, he played heavy, but he wasn't as good in coverage as Wohler. Zachman is better than the off guys. I mean, he's better than Joe Ferguson. He's better than, those kinds of guys. But I would say the corners, outside of Nick Nelson, I think Forkerine or Hallman are better than like a Tyndall. I mean, I really like Derek Tyndall, but I think both of them are a notch better.
I would agree.
So it's trying to reconcile, like, this team actually kind of has a good secondary, but they can't seem to get the rest of it together. And what do you, again, to your point, where do you pin it? As I said to you before we hit the record button, this is not Mike Tressel apologia. We're not interested in doing that. This isn't Luke Fickell apologia, but that's what the issue is. Wherever you want to point that finger at the whatever's going on there in the front seven, do it. I'm fine with it pointing at Fickell. I'm fine with it pointing at Tressel. I'm fine with it pointing at they didn't have the talent. I'm fine with they're not picking the right guys in the portal. I'm fine with it being it's too complicated. Whatever you want, but that's what it is. It's just they're not there in the front. It's a long way of saying that.
They're not. And yeah, if they got the talent acquisition part right this year,
we'll see.
It'll be better. But it's not going to be like it was in 2017 and 2018. It's just not.
No, I mean, I guess the assumption is based on the changes, they feel it's at least partially schematic, right? Because they're bringing 300-pound linebackers in.
That's a reasonable
air quotes. So it's a change in scheme in some way, shape, or form. Curious to see what it is, because I will say this: if you take away the numbers, like if you put it on low resolution and you can't see the players and you block the score and all that stuff, it's tough to the defenses don't look that different. Other than you're like, oh wow, look at those defensive linemen get pushed back 3 yards.
Right.
Look at the edge guys not getting those tackles' hands off them. Like they're just exploding. I mean, the quintessential play is. In that 2018 game, Iowa is trying to score on like a 3rd and goal from the 2. Ryan Connolly is up on the line and he bursts through, is across the field, goes laterally and just kind of hits a shoulder into a knee and takes down Akram Wadley. And it's like, wow, look at this amazing tackle he makes 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, forcing a field goal, blah, 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 blah. But what's remarkable about the play is not just what he does, but then directly behind him, TJ Edwards has beaten off 3 people. And if, Ryan Connolly can't just get lucky and hit the knee with his shoulder, Edwards is cleaning it up right behind him. And Connor Sheehy is free. You're just like, it's a different animal. Like, it's just a different animal than what you've seen. And that one sums it up for me. It's just all different.
Anyway, it's funny too. You look back in that 2017 game. Yeah, like I said, Wisconsin was undefeated, number 8 in the country. And when you look at that talent, it's I don't know if we're spoiled because that level of talent on this team is up there with the best of all the Badger teams.
For sure
on defense. Like it really, really is.
Yeah. So I think that's what it comes down to for me. To answer your question, Mr. or Ms. 317.
Which is to say, we got to it, but very good question.
Yeah. So thanks for sending this in.
Yes.
Sometimes it takes us 3 months to get to them, but it was good. It was a good exercise. And I feel like I actually learned something from it. So, or maybe not confirmed something for me, but made it very obvious for me looking at it. So remember how this was going to be a short show?
We say that every time.
All right, let's wrap this. Maybe I think we'll be back next week just looking at the timing of practices. We're not going to have enough material. We'll be a week after that. So we'll get like 4 or 5 practices in so we have some things to work through unless something happens and we'll be back. So
yep, I agree.
Until the next time, Max.
Yep, till the next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.